Welcome to Gospel Tangents, the best source for Mormon history, science, and theology. I'm Rick Bennett. W. Phelps was one of the most influential and important early writers and defenders of Mormonism. It should probably come as no surprise that he probably helped with Joseph Smith's first vision account. We'll learn more about those details with Dr. Bruce Van Orden. He's the biographer of W. Phelps. We'll sing and we'll shout the life and times of W. Phelps. So check out our conversation.
If I remember right, and please correct me if I'm wrong, we have a 1838 account, or 1838-39 account of the first vision, and then there's an 1842 account as well. It sounds like Phelps played a big role in the 1842 account, but probably not 1838, is that right?
Well, the only record we have of that account is in the handwriting of James Mulholland, who was Joseph Smith's scribe for the history that he was starting to compose. He received revelation that he should start his official history there in Far West, and he started it, but we don't know exactly the procedures and the dates he worked on it because it's not in the record. But Mulholland did take dictation from Joseph Smith about that first vision story that has been canonized and used in the pamphlets that the missionaries give out about
the 1838 account.
The official one. It doesn't look like it's exactly 100% in the language of Joseph Smith by Joseph Smith's language standards. Richard Bushman inquired of me whether Phelps might have had his hand in the composition of that account, because it kind of sounds like some of Phelps's way of writing. I couldn't find any direct evidence of it. However, remember that Phelps was back in the church by July of 1838, and when Joseph Smith might have been working on that in July, August, and September, before the war really broke out, or at least in July and August, he could have maybe had some help in some of the early drafts of that official account. He could have. We don't know.
Okay.
But when he arrived in Nauvoo and Don Carlos Smith passed away and the editorship of the Times and Seasons fell into the hands of Ebenezer Robinson, who had been a Danite with Sidney Rigdon back in Missouri, and now was doing some things that were not pleasing to Joseph Smith and the 12. By this time, the 12 had come back from their mission in Britain and had been instated as leadership over the entire church. By 1841, mid-1841, the 12 were under the First Presidency over the whole church.
Okay.
That did happen in 1841.
There was still a high council, though.
A high council, but it was a stake. It was a stake high council in Nauvoo. And there were other stakes. There were several stakes of Zion at that stage of the game.
So essentially the apostles did take supremacy over the high council.
Yes. Now, some people argue that William Marks, president of the high council in Nauvoo, had equal authority to the 12, and he maybe thought he did, but in the succession crisis he played a role. That's true. But we now can see that Joseph Smith had placed the 12 apostles under the First Presidency and used them in authoritative ways for the rest of his life, from 1841 through 1844, for 3 years. The 12 did play a huge role.
Okay.
Anyway, Joseph Smith assigned the 12, Brigham Young, John Taylor, Wilford Woodruff primarily, to take over the Times and Seasons in behalf of the church. And so they insisted that Ebenezer Robinson sell his rights to the foundry, the printing press, the printing office, everything, to the 12, so it could become an official church paper. They forced him to do that, and Phelps was in on those negotiations because he had just arrived and had been helping Don Carlos Smith and Ebenezer Robinson. But anyway, Robinson was forced to sell, which he did, and so the 12 apostles in early 1842 took over the Times and Seasons. And officially, Joseph Smith became the editor for 8 months in 1842. But the problem is, Joseph Smith never even went to the printing office except a few times at night to check on newspapers about what they were saying about him that had come in from the east. Remember, all newspaper offices got newspapers from all over the country. That was just part of the arrangement in those days. And he wanted to check about what they were saying about him. He did not play a role in the day-to-day functioning of the editing of the Times and Seasons. I came to the conclusion, based on internal evidence and writing styles, and some of the historical evidence that comes from the journals, that Phelps was running the day-to-day operations then of the printing of the newspaper. John Taylor and Wilford Woodruff were involved, but they didn't do any of the writing. Woodruff did entirely the business operations, and John Taylor was sick some of the time and doing other assignments, so he wasn't even there to run the newspaper, although he was kind of the assistant editor under Joseph Smith. This is the shocking thing that I came up with. It shocked me that Phelps was actually doing the writing for the Times and Seasons. Particularly making sure the content was what he wanted in the Times and Seasons. Around this time, John Wentworth, major newspaper editor in Chicago, asked Joseph Smith if he might produce a history of the Latter-day Saints. The title was Church History, and in a letter, Joseph Smith supposedly put together this history. It's multi-page. It was not ever published by Wentworth, but it was published in the Times and Seasons at the upstart of Joseph Smith's editorship, official editorship, of the Times and Seasons. The Wentworth letter includes the first vision story, the first published story in Joseph Smith's name. The official 1838 edition had not come out in published form yet, so this was the first one.
Oh, I didn't realize that.
It came out later in the Times and Seasons as part of the official history, as Phelps put together Joseph Smith's history, that he called it that, in the Times and Seasons. But this was the first published version by Joseph Smith. However, preceding this version were printed accounts of the first vision by both Orson Pratt in Scotland and Orson Hyde on continental Europe, where they described what happened in the first vision. And it's obvious that some of the same language used by Pratt and Hyde was used in the Wentworth letter account, 1842 account. It's very obvious to me, and it even comes out in the Joseph Smith Papers project, that Phelps was Joseph Smith's assistant in putting together this Wentworth letter. It's a lengthy history of the church for those 12 years, including all of the problems in Missouri. And it's obvious that Phelps wrote that part because he was part of what happened in Jackson County and Clay County and Far West. And Joseph wasn't part of any of that. And it's in Phelps's language, his rhetorical style. I've come to the conclusion even that those beautiful phrases and paragraphs toward the end of the Wentworth letter that talk about how the church will grow and cover the world was actually in the florid language of W.W. Phelps. Of course, it's in Joseph Smith's name, but I think that Phelps helped write it. The very last part of the Wentworth letter are the 13 Articles of Faith. Most of us historians believe that some of those statements, the 13, were actually first articulated by Orson Pratt. And so they were refined a bit and edited. But I believe that Articles 11, 12, and 13, which were not articulated by Pratt, were put in there in the language of Phelps.
Oh.
We claim the privilege of worshiping God according to the dictates of our own conscience and allow all men the same privilege to worship how, where, or what they may. I believe that was Phelps's way of saying it because he did teach that. He said that type of thing earlier. The idea of being subject to kings, presidents, magistrates, and so forth, and 12th Article of Faith, I think that's in the language of Phelps. Of course, Joseph Smith believed all that. It's in his name. And then the 13th article of faith, which was very flowery, I believe was in Phelps' language. So as Phelps became the ghostwriter for Joseph Smith on some doctrinal essays that appeared in the Times and Seasons in 1842, he was doing so in behalf of Joseph Smith. All sorts of other people in history have used writers to help them put together their essays. There's nothing evil about that. But it came as a surprise to me as a researcher, and it surprises other people too, that some of these essays about the Holy Ghost and baptism for the dead and try the spirits were ghost-written in 1842 by W.W. Phelps. Joseph Smith gave up the editorship over to John Taylor officially in late 1842. Well, once again, Phelps continued to write some of the main articles. It's obvious now under John Taylor's direction. As we get into the 1844 period, when we had the Council of 50, and we now see the minutes of that, they talked about what Phelps was doing at the printing office and all the writing. So it's proof there that Phelps was actually the main force at the printing office.
Oh, that's very interesting. I know in one of our other conversations that we had on Facebook, I had a previous interview with Dr. Derek Sainsbury, and we talked about the Joseph Smith presidential campaign, and you said that he was probably the ghostwriter for General Joseph Smith's views. Is that right?
Correct. Starting in February of 1843, which would be 15 or so months before the martyrdom, Joseph Smith was now mayor and also judge of the mayor's court. Joseph Smith pulled Phelps aside and said, I want you to be the lawyer in Israel. I want you to be my lawyer. I want you to know all about the law. And at that point, Phelps became Joseph Smith's right-hand political clerk. He became the clerk of the mayor's court. He became a major participant in city council meetings, and we do have the minutes of those city council meetings. One can see what Phelps said. There's more of his language than Joseph Smith's language appearing in the minutes of the Nauvoo City Council. He was a city councilor. The whole idea of habeas corpus that Joseph Smith used, he learned about the value of that after Phelps had studied Blackstone and other legal minds that were the basis of the American legal system. And so Phelps was his political clerk. When it was decided in late 1843 and entering into 1844 that the church needed to have somebody that they could support for the presidential campaign of 1844, Phelps was the one who wrote back and forth with these presidential candidates, asking them what they believed. And he was able to answer Calhoun and Clay in behalf of Joseph Smith. He was Joseph Smith's amanuensis for writing those letters. And then it was decided in March of 1844 that Joseph Smith himself would become the candidate, and Phelps was assigned to write a platform, a 17-pager, and it was edited and discussed by the Council of 50 Brethren, and a few changes were made and all that at their request, but the author, the ghostwriter, was W.W. Phelps. I had said that and published that in the BYU studies back in 1993. That was a fairly well-known fact, actually, and not disputed. But apparently a lot of people think that, not reading these scholarly manuscripts, think that Joseph Smith maybe wrote his own platform. Well, it's not in his language, and he used all sorts of these tricks of using other languages, Latin and Hebrew and Egyptian and other things that he threw into the platform. That was his way of trying to show off what he knew and to make it look like Joseph Smith knew all these other languages too. And then when Joseph Smith, as candidate, wanted to communicate with people in Washington or the Green Mountain Boys in Vermont or other letters he wrote to newspapers, it was Phelps who wrote them for him. I wasn't the only person who saw this. Other people, like Samuel Brown, for example, who has written a lot about Joseph Smith's thought process, they all know, and people say that Phelps is the ghostwriter. But he definitely was the ghostwriter for all of the political documents.
That's very interesting. Are there any other big important things that he probably ghost wrote for Joseph?
Well, there were these theological ones in 1842. 5 of them ended up being printed in Joseph Fielding Smith's compilation, Teachings of the Prophet Joseph Smith.
Okay.
And Joseph Fielding Smith, who was the church historian back in the 30s, 38, when he published this, took from existing sources. He had access to them. But a lot of the Nauvoo era sermons or essays that were in Joseph Smith's name appeared in the Times and Seasons. And so he just took them from the Times and Seasons and plopped them and gave them paragraph structure into the Teachings of the Prophet Joseph Smith. Well, it's my strong opinion that 5 of those, one of them is called the Holy Ghost, another one baptism, another one baptism for the dead. The biggest one and most interesting one is Try the Spirits. That went on for page after page after page and used a lot of historical references and events that were clearly showing what Phelps knew, and other languages too. So it's my considered opinion that Phelps is the ghostwriter for those theological pieces.
I'm trying to remember, there was one, and it might be in the King Follett sermon, I'm not sure, where Joseph Smith said something about, well, in the German Bible it says this, and then he kind of expanded, and I was like, how did Joseph know German? Do you think that was a Phelps?
Well, it is true that Phelps really promoted the idea of Joseph Smith knowing languages, but it was Joseph Smith's idea in the first place in Kirtland to study other languages, to get to the original meaning as the revelations came forward, theoretically in Egyptian or Hebrew or Greek. And so Joseph Smith got involved in Egyptian. We know that from the book of Abraham. He got involved with Hebrew, with the Hebrew school, and then he studied Greek also in Kirtland, and then reinvigorated himself into studying languages a bit again in Nauvoo. Not a lot of time. He didn't have much time to do it, but he did spend some time. And there was this German-speaking convert who was converted in London, but he was from Prussia. He was a German-speaking Jew, Alexander Neubauer, or Niebuhr, as some people pronounce it. And he, of course, knew his German, and he became a tutor to Joseph Smith in the German language. And in one of Joseph Smith's speeches, he said that the German language edition of the Bible is the best. And the people have been really proud of that. Well, he felt that, obviously, as he had learned from Neubauer, and actually Phelps had believed that too. So I guess it kind of came from Phelps and Neubauer both.
Oh, interesting. Do you know what sermon that I was referring to?
I don't think it's the King Follett sermon. I think it's another sermon.
Okay.
Now, remember that Joseph Smith gave lots of sermons,
right,
Sunday after Sunday, at the Grove. He also gave some sermons over in Macedonia. And section 130 and 131 of the Doctrine and Covenants come from documents of Macedonia. Section 130 is actually taken from 2 sermons that he gave over in Macedonia, a Mormon settlement in eastern.
This isn't in Greece, right?
No, they called it Macedonia. And they named it after what Paul had said, come over and help us. It was originally called Ramus, Illinois, and then they called it Macedonia after that Pauline experience.
Oh, okay.
And it was a Latter-day Saint settlement. And Joseph Smith went over there and stayed at the home of Benjamin F. Johnson, and then gave talks, and William Clayton wrote them down. And some of the extractions from that talk, 2 talks, are now section 130 of the Doctrine and Covenants.
Okay.
I hope you enjoyed our conversation with Dr. Bruce Van Orden. In our next conversation, we're going to talk about W. Phelps' role in translating the Book of Abraham. For believers, there are 2 schools of thought about how to reconcile problems with the Book of Abraham.
If we consider it prophetic, the Book of Abraham, there are 2 possibilities. One, that There were other papyri that have not come back to light, that were lost or burned, that did contain the actual writings of Abraham, and he used that to translate from into our book of Abraham. I don't believe it, but some people believe it.
Mm-hmm.
The other one is that he got so caught up in this was a catalyst, and he received inspiration, the mind and will of God, by the gift and power of God as we came forth in the Book of Mormon.
If you'd like to hear the entire interview uncut, please subscribe for just $5 a month at patreon.com/GospelTangents, and you can hear the entire interview before everybody else. If you'd like to watch the entire video for just $8 a month, you can either subscribe on YouTube, Patreon, or my website, GospelTangents.com. Just click the yellow subscribe button, and I'll add you to our Gospel Tangents Insiders group so that you can see entire videos. For those interested in a PDF transcript, you can subscribe at either Patreon or on my website. For just $10 a month, I'll send you a PDF as soon as it's complete. If you'd like a copy of the paperback as well as a PDF, just sign up for $20 a month at either Patreon or my website, GospelTangents.com. Of course, you can buy individual transcripts at Amazon.com and just do a search for Gospel Tangents interview, and you can see all the things that we have there. Don't forget to support Gospel Tangents with an awesome t-shirt like one of these. You can subscribe at Apple Podcasts at tinyurl.com/GospelTangents. Get our latest updates at Facebook.com/GospelTangents. Also, you can get our Twitter updates at Gospel Tangents. Click here to subscribe, here for a transcript, and over here we've got more of our great videos. Thanks again.